This video will focus on the simplest, clearest, and most straightforward way of correcting run-on sentences, which is simply to divide the run-on sentence into two separate sentences. This video is part 2 in my series on correcting run-on sentences, so before you watch this video, make sure that you've watched part 1, identifying run-on sentences. That first video teaches you how to recognize run-on sentences, while this one focuses on how to correct them. It only makes sense that you'll need to know how to recognize a run-on sentence before you can correct it. Also, if you're completing this as part of a module in Canvas, make sure that you've completed the quiz on identifying run-on sentences as well. Completing that quiz will help you be sure that you can identify run-on sentences, and it's also a part of your grade in the course, so you want to give it your full attention. Let's start with a quick review of that first video. Here's the definition we looked at. Remember, run-on sentences occur when two or more sentences are written as one sentence. In order to correct a run-on sentence, we often divide it into separate sentences, and that's what we're talking about in this video. We also talked about some steps you can follow to help in identifying run-on sentences, which is not always easy to do. Here's an example of a run-on sentence. The first step in our process is to identify and circle all of the verbs in the sentence. This sentence has two verbs, creates and makes. The second step is to ask who or what is doing the action. In this sentence, slouching is what creates the impression, and it is what makes a person seem uninterested, bored, and lacking in confidence. Step 3 is to see if we have multiple subject-verb combinations, and we do in this sentence. We have two, slouching creates and it makes. And then we look for a word that connects them, like and or because. We don't have one of those in this sentence. So according to step 4, this is a run-on sentence. The simplest way to correct a run-on sentence is by placing a period in between the two subject-verb combinations. But in the original sentence, there was only a comma in between them, and we cannot use only a comma to separate two complete sentences. Here I've placed a period in between the two complete sentences, making it correct. Now let's talk more specifically about how to divide run-on sentences into separate sentences. Here's the takeaway for this lesson. Since a run-on sentence is two or more complete sentences written as if they are one sentence, the simplest way to correct a run-on sentence is to divide it into separate sentences. This just means placing a period between the two sentences. This will always correct a run-on sentence. Often the writer of the run-on sentence will mistakenly use a comma instead of a period to separate two sentences, and this is sometimes called a comma splice. Other times there is no comma or other mark of punctuation used to separate complete sentences, and these can be more difficult to correct. But if you can figure out where one sentence ends and the next one begins, you can always correct the run-on sentence by placing a period in between the two sentences. Now let's look at an example. Pause the video for a moment and try to determine if or not this is a run-on sentence. If it is, try to figure out how to correct it. Remember to follow the steps we covered earlier to determine if the sentence is a run-on. And remember that our goal here is to divide the run-on sentence into separate sentences. You should have identified is and fine as the verbs, and answering and people as the subjects for these verbs. Since we have two subject-verb combinations here without a word to connect them, this is a run-on sentence. And we only have a comma in between the two complete sentences, which is incorrect. By replacing that comma with a period, we correct the run-on sentence, making it into two correctly written complete sentences. Now let's look at one more. Again, pause the video for a moment and follow the steps to figure out if this is a run-on sentence. And if so, divide it into separate sentences. You should have identified set up and check as the verbs, and people and they as the subjects for these verbs. Since we have two subject-verb combinations here without a word to connect them, this is a run-on sentence. And we only have a comma in between the two complete sentences, which is incorrect. By replacing that comma with a period, we correct the run-on sentence, making it into two correctly written complete sentences. This concludes part 2 of this lesson. If you're viewing this as part of a module in Canvas, click on Take the Quiz below the video to get some more practice with dividing run-on sentences into separate sentences. If you're having trouble with the quiz items, make sure to watch the video again. If you still have trouble, contact me to get some extra help.